a sermon. But the usual location for the sermon wasn't quite appropriate. It would have been only 5 minutes into the service. What with the way the service is abbreviated because of the Chag, because we are already riding high on our sense of rejoicing and of Kedusha, of holiness. So, one of the largest sections of the Bible, indeed by simple word count, the largest section of the whole Tanakh, is the Nevi'im, the book of the prophets. And we read selections from them at different times throughout the year. In fact, that's what we read each week, known as the Haftarah. However, I think that perhaps our knowledge of the prophets is not quite as strong as it ought to be. In fact, if there were more people here than just Bernie, I would do a prophet quiz and see how many people can name different prophets who fit different descriptions. Now, some of them are pretty easy. If I were to say the greatest of all prophets, Moses, very simple, #1 prophet of all time, in a league entirely by himself. If I were to say the prophet who went up in a fiery chariot, again, probably a pretty good number of you are thinking, wait, isn't that Elijah? Isn't that Eliyahu Hanavi, who we sing about at Havdalah, and who we look for at the time of Pesach at our Seder? And you'd be right. If I were to say the prophet who was alive at the fall of the first temple of Jerusalem, it's starting to get a little bit harder. But if you have been to services in the summer as we are leading up towards the time of Tisha B'Av, which commemorates that and many other terrible events in our history, you might have noticed that we leaned heavily towards the prophet Yirmiyahu, the prophet of Jeremiah. A little bit easier, although certainly wrote far less material, if I were to say the prophet who ran away. You'd probably be able to tell me Jonah. Again, that would be easier if you come on the afternoon service of Yom Kippur. But if I were to tell you the name of the prophet whom we will read tomorrow for the second day of Shavuot, when it is this special reading, you probably wouldn't even recognize it as being the name of a Jewish prophet. Habakkuk. Habakkuk. Who is this guy? Who is this prophet, and what in the world is he trying to teach us? Well, our rabbis of blessed memory, Chazal, did not like to leave people unaccounted for in the text. If they had a name of a particular prophet, but no other context about who they were, where they lived, what time period they were in, they would leaf through the other teachings, the other writings of the Tanakh, of the Bible, and try and find some way to understand who this person might have been. And indeed, when it comes to Habakkuk, they found a very likely candidate. They said, if you notice, there is a very special person that is born during the time of the prophet Elisha, who was the disciple of Elijah. And yet we never hear more about him, but certainly this person must have had an extraordinary life. For you see, there is a very important story in the development of Elisha's prophecy, that he comes multiple times to a particular area, and a local woman, a Shunammite woman as she is called, says, you know, this man of God continues to come by, we should make a little room. And her husband agrees, and they build a little annex to the house so that he can stay there. And while he is staying there, he is so touched by her consideration that he asks if there's anything that can be done as a way of showing gratitude and of thanks, a blessing that could be brought to her and her family. His assistant, Gehazi, says, well, you know, they don't have any children, and her husband's a little old, so they're probably not going to have any children. And so Elisha says, very well, you, my good lady, you will be embracing a child the next time I come, next year at this time. And the term for embracing, choveket. It has the same basic consonants as Habakkuk. You have to learn to play a little loose with the vowels in Hebrew, but it's the consonants that are important. And so the sages say, aha, this child born to this woman out of consideration for the kindness she bestowed upon the prophet Elisha, this became the prophet Habakkuk. And this now opens up a new insight. Because Habakkuk says in his prophecy that is read on tomorrow, for tomorrow's Haftarah, that he has heard of God, he has heard of the tellings of God, and he is afraid. And they say, well, wait a minute. Why would this young man be afraid? What is his fear coming from? Because certainly the rest of the Haftarah, the rest of his prophecy is also hopeful. So how can he be both at once afraid and in awe and impressed? We say, well, look what happened to him. This is a young man who would go out eventually into the fields, and while he was there, he would grab his head and he collapsed. And after he collapsed, his mother quickly went, found Elisha, brought him back, and Elisha brought him back to life. Now, rather than saying that was the beginning of his niviyut, of his prophetic career, the sages say no. That was what he had envisioned that filled him with fear. That he was already a full-fledged prophet, not a small boy out in the field, but a young man out in the field who was already filled with the ability to have prophetic visions. And he saw his own death. He saw his own resurrection. And that was what set him trembling. That is what made him afraid. But I can hear you asking, even through the camera, but if he saw his death, I'd understand that this would fill somebody with fear. But if he saw his resurrection at the hands of Elisha, then certainly he must have been relieved. That would have been a wonderful thing. All things considered, if you know that you're going to be resurrected by a great prophet, then, okay, it's going to be an experience, something for the journal, but nothing to get afraid of. You're a prophet after all. You know how it's going to turn out. But that is not how Jewish prophecy works. Jewish prophecy is not about reading the pages that come at the end of the story and removing the tension from the middle. Jewish prophecy is about reading the pages that come at the end of the chapter if you continue to go on the path that you are walking. If that changes, if decisions are made, then that ending will not be there. So as he saw the vision of his own death, and even as he was comforted by the prophet Elisha's ability to revive him, he had to also be afraid, what if I do something that will prevent this miracle from happening for me? What if Elisha does something? What if my mother? What if my father? What if one of the kings does something and there's a war and there's no opportunity? What if I die and there is no miracle to restore me? Will there be truly redemption for me? And that anxiety is something that I think all of us can sympathize with. That a prophet, even one who was confident in God's ability to bring him back from this disaster, could still be worried that perhaps something would prevent that opportunity from materializing. Yes, the other more famous prophets are categorical and clear that there will be a full redemption of not only the Jewish people, but the entire world. We have experienced pieces of that redemption with the restoration from the land of Babylon, with our own existence throughout all the trials and tribulations of history. We have confidence that redemption will come, that there will be a full resurrection of the world. But are we confident that each and every one of us will be able to experience that in the right and beautiful way? Or are we worried that perhaps the redemption will come, but we will have to have gone through too many disasters, too much suffering, too much delay before that is finally brought about to be? And that should concern us. Judaism tells us that we have absolute confidence the world will be redeemed, but we should have no certainty that our place in the world is assured. We have not been given a complimentary ticket to first class in the world. We have instead been told, this is where the ship is going. There may be rough seas ahead. Some of you may not have the easiest journey. But here's what you can do to improve the travel. Here's what you can do to make the journey better. And we should therefore bend our backs into improving the trip, even as we worry of what will happen to us and all the others around us along the way. And even as we maintain confidence, the course has been well set, and the destination will be reached. But as we always say, Bimhira v'yameinu, may we reach that destination sooner rather than later, and may we be the instruments that help speed up that process, or at the very least, make this world more beautiful and comfortable as the journey continues. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.